Hi all, I have another fascinating game of Emanuel Lasker today to show you. He was playing Richard Reti in the 1924 New York tournament. This is in round 10 and I have an amazing picture from that tournament I'm showing you here. So this is, if you look at the standing row from left to right, that's Frank Marshall, multiple times US champion, standing there. Next to him, Tartakoa. Next to him, it's actually Maroczy. Not to be confused with Ed Lasker. Maroczy, as in Maroczy bind. Alexander Alekhine then. Richard Reti, so one of the players of this featured game today. Bogolojabal. We have, sitting is Yates, multiple times British champion. We have Capablanca, Cuban genius. We have Janowski. He's beaten each of the first 4 world champions. Apparently that's only been shared with Tarash quite some time, that achievement. We have Ed Lasker and we have Emanuel Lasker. So the two Laskers, not to be confused. Ed Lasker did a famous King Hunt game. Check that out, brilliancy game in the Dutch defence. So Emanuel Lasker looking across there. Okay, let's go to the featured game. So Emanuel Lasker playing white against Richard Reti, round 10. It kicks off with e4. Richard Reti plays the French defence. We have d4, d5, knight c3, knight f6, so the classical variation inviting white to close the centre. We have the very trendy pin nowadays, bishop g5. Now bishop b4. This is a third choice move apparently for black in this system. It's the McCutcheon variation. Not to be confused with McDonald's. Not MAC, it's MC. Yes. I think Harding mentions that in Wiki. Sick, if you're going to say MAC. No, McCutcheon variation. MC, CUT, CH, etc. Okay, so knight GE2. We have a kind of gambit here. The most common move is actually E5. And we've seen actually quite a lot of engine games on the channel with this variation. It's a little bit unclear actually. Very interesting imbalances for both sides. So anyway, knight ge2 sets off an interesting gambit which you might want to try in your own games. I think I might want to try it as well. So it's the idea is to temporarily sacrifice a pawn and get very interesting imbalances actually after. We have black taking on e4. And now a3, and of course black shouldn't really encourage knight takes c3 because then white has the bishop pair and is going to get that centre pawn back. So the bishop retreats. And we have now Emanuel Lasker. I know he was lethal with the dark square bishop in our featured game yesterday. Here he volunteers the dark square bishop with bishop takes f6. And black plays g takes f6. Maybe this is a little bit dodgy. However, in modern games, bishop takes f6, there's an example game, Vasily Ivanchuk playing white against Volkov in Moscow 2005. And Ivanchuk got quite a good position. He played this fianchetto, which is necessary because the knight's blocking in the bishop from normal development. And he got a reasonable position, and it went like this. And anyway, he won later in 39 moves. So anyway, here we have, it's a dynamic move, g takes f6. After knight takes e4 though, this next move has been criticised by Alexander Alekhine actually in his one of his tournament books. He recommended instead, he thought it was a bit too weakening, he recommended instead b6. And this does seem a little bit like what you might want to do in one of my favourite variations in black, when playing black. In Blitz, the Bern variation of the French defence. It reminds me a little bit of this. White has to maybe play for d5 to get an advantage, and it fractures the black pawns. Black's got the bishop pair. It's interesting. So maybe b6 was the way, not f5. But how do we concretely exploit this f5? We have the knight going to c3. We have bishop d7. c6 has been seen actually in a game of Zwaisa Polgar against Bosman. So that went g3 and bishop g2. And white got a decent position and actually won rather quickly in 24 moves. Let me just quickly show you that. Because it was a 24 move win. Yeah, let's have a quick look at that. So knight d3 there. Giving up the light square bishop. Lots of tempo gains. g4, and even though white's given up both bishops, the king there with that fractured pawn structure seems fairly unsafe. Rook lift. Whoa! And black was in severe trouble and resigned here. So yeah, one of the Polar sisters featuring there with the move c6. But we have bishop d7 in this game. This seems to acknowledge, it's a nod up to this bishop maybe wanting to come to g2. We have queen d2, bishop d6. There's also another property of this bishop d7 though. It's covering that b5. So sometimes if black really wants to play this, then knight b5 is going to be dangerous, but it's covered at the moment. We see it's covered by that bishop on d7. Now white castles queenside, and we have queen e7. Knight g3, and it does give the idea actually that this might be a lot more effective given black's bishop d7. This whole plan is ready to spring into action if black castled kingside routinely, instead of aiming for that fianchetto. For example, well, black played quite a tactical move, queen h4. Some chess games commentators started, mentioned you don't want to start a tactical war with Lasker. It does threaten bishop f4 here to pin the queen. But if instead, just for a moment, let's consider black castling, knight h5 does seem actually quite cute because there's queen h6, nice cooperation of queen and knight against the king. Doesn't look as though this is too healthy for black, this scenario. In fact, the cheeky g3 and then delayed g4 it's still dangerous. Yeah, for example, like this, it's all very dangerous. White's getting a big advantage here. So yeah, it's very, very tricky variations here after knight h5. Yeah, g3, just waiting for black to close up the diagonal if otherwise bishop g2, and then later g4. Just to recap that, g4 is actually going to be good there. The bishop can try and get on this diagonal instead. So it's a dangerous scenario. So queen h4 is a tactical move with a tactical threat for sure. And we have this move queen e1, which basically says, well, your king's still in the centre. There's potentially a threat of knight takes f5. But white has to factor in queen f4 check, recapturing like that. We have knight c6. Here, if castling here a scenario, just to show you, king b1, maybe knight b5 there. So if ever knight c6, knight b5 is invited in a way. And this is getting that dark square bishop, and d5. This is a bit bad for black's pawn structure, you'd think. And even if white has that seemingly miserable e3 pawn here, this technically is more dangerous for black than for white. It favours white here. So anyway, knight c6. We have knight takes f5. So an indulgence into this tactical idea. So knight e3 going back, knight takes d4. However, there's a tempo gainer, g3, which means that the bishop fianchetto is more lucrative if running with tempo, and it does. And we have knight c6 shielding that b7. If black had castled queenside, then actually it seems as though here white plays knight c4, for example. And this position, there's intense scrutiny on black's position. For example, knight f5, knight takes. And if here, then bishop e4. This looks uncomfortable for black generally, this position. So anyway, we see knight c6, f4, a forcing move again, queen g7, and now knight b5. Yeah, this does seem to be black's in total trouble, in absolute trouble here after knight b5. He's been pushed off the board actually. This just looks very, very unfortunate. So yeah, just before we get into this, because this actually looks too unfortunate, that knight c6, which was played. If castle, let's have a look at this again. What about bishop c6 instead? If bishop c6 had been played, f4, there's knight e4. White can pick up at least a small advantage here, like this. So whatever way, but this, yeah, it does kind of invite this knight b5 once that queen's pushed away from b5, as in the game. And this does look very uncomfortable indeed. White's opening here has been a big success, you could argue. So black castled. Clearly he can't move that bishop. It's paralyzed. Knight takes c7 check. And if he plays a desperate looking move like queen f8, then white can pile on the pressure with knight e3 to c4. And here it's going to be taking a pawn. It's horrendous for black. So yeah, he castles. So white is officially actually going a pawn up now. From that temporary pawn sack in the opening, white's a pawn up. And the pieces seem superior, actually. This knight seems quite nice compared to that. This bishop definitely seems better than that one. We have rook fd8, queen d2, bishop e8. Yeah, the bishop hasn't got that many squares. And now, piling up on the d file. But, I don't know, Reti just gives up here. I know it's like move 23. I don't know what it is about Emanuel Lasker, but Reti, okay, maybe he felt there was some sort of attack on the c file potentially, that it's better not to have exchanges. He played rook dc8. Yeah, there's a big problem with white dominating the d file here, and in conjunction with f5 and this terrible bishop. There's quite a lot of strategic trump cards here. White's just got an enormous position from the opening. It's like a dream position, really. White has no bad pieces at all and complete domination of that d file. And f5, f6 threatens to be a dreaded fawn pawn if ever this pawn goes to f6, and it's around the king. And the king also has been compromised. There's only a pawn shield of 2 there, so it's been splintered anyway. It's not as safe as it usually is. So all in all, it's a horrendous position. But black, maybe, if he wanted to play a few more moves, rook takes. After rook d8, queen c5. Just get the rooks off. White's still got a big advantage, but maybe, yeah, there's nothing really inspiring black here, except from a long struggle, which he could still lose in the end. So it hastens to the end, perhaps. Speeds up to the end. f5. It's just horrendous after f5. It tries e5, which means f6 is now possible because of that lateral rook pressure. If e takes f5, knight takes f5. I mean, this is just a nightmare. This is just total nightmare. A rook lift, for rook g4 to terminate. That's a weakness of the last move. Knight e7 is checkmate. Yeah. So it's actually black's really just getting terminated after this fawn pawn is installed. THORN, or if you're American, FAWN. Yeah, there are 2 different ways of spelling fawn pawn. So queen f8, and we have a knight on f5. As we know, they're quite dangerous. Knight f5 and fawn pawn and domination of d file. Yeah. And big threats like queen g5. It's completely crushed. Black has been completely crushed with this. Yeah, he's just made things a lot worse. We have king h8, queen g5. After rook c7, how does white concretely destroy black? White to play here for 200 points. What would you play with white? Lasker does do something that neural networks seem acutely aware of. He volunteers, actually, okay, I'm going to say now, he volunteers the light square bishop, and quite often neural networks, when they give up a bishop of a certain colour, it's the other colours which they can celebrate. And here, actually, there's greater access to d8. And in fact, we have rook d8, and it's devastating. Rook cc8 is played. And here, can you see the final crushing idea for 200 points? White to play here. Okay. Queen G7 check. Yes, forcing the exchange of queens and the king to be on G8 because of knight E7, forking king and rook. Devastation. Yeah, 32 moves. Devastation of Richard Reti there. Accuracy levels, you might be wondering. Emanuel Lasker, like 18 average centre pawn loss. And Richard Reti, 44 average centre pawn loss. So again, a really hugely accurate game for Emanuel Lasker. I think I'm starting to get an understanding of why he's not covered so much, or he didn't really seem to have a pronounced interesting style. It's because he was playing really accurately like a computer. That's my observation so far. His games are super accurate, it seems, and ahead of their time, as far as I can tell. He has, in my view, I share the view of many at Chess Games comment, he seems to stand the test of time. This is 1924, this game. Huge accuracy. Amazing player. Okay, I hope you got something out of it. Comments, questions, likes, subscribes, all appreciated. Thanks very much. Oh, sorry, I should plug my own correspondence server here. Kingscrusher TV, if you want to invite me for a game. If you register there, I'll be able to invite you for a game soon after. Or bit.ly/chessmold. Okay. Thanks very much.